I'm Larry Burns, the president of the Rice Design Alliance, and on behalf of the RDA, I welcome you to the 7th Annual Spotlight, the Rice Design Alliance Prize presentation and lecture. We're grateful to the Museum of Fine Arts for the use of this wonderful auditorium, and would like to thank the museum for their continued support of our programs. We also want to thank the Rice School of Architecture and Dean Sarah Whiting for their continued support of our organization and mission. And a thank you to the sponsors here on the screen who have made this event possible tonight. And I'd also like to thank and recognize the sponsor of the reception this evening, Cardinal Haynes Whaley. Before we make the spotlight presentation, please take a look at some of the upcoming RDA and RSA fall programs. You can find more information on all these programs on their respective websites. Tonight, as a courtesy to our guests, please silence your cell phones and do not use any flash photography. 7 years ago, the Rice Program Committee, the RDA Program Committee, decided that not only should RDA identify and highlight as outstanding young architects, but that a prize for such talent should be presented on an annual basis. This initiative has become Spotlight, the Rice Design Alliance Prize. Each year, a jury of professors and graduates of the Rice School of Architecture and the University of Houston College of Architecture reviews eligible honorees for the Spotlight Prize, who must be within the first 15 years of professional practice and demonstrate design excellence and the promise of a great design future. Now, as president of the Rice Design Alliance and on behalf of the Rice Design Alliance Board of Directors, it's my great honor to present the 7th Annual RDA Award to Linna and Tarik of Oualalou+Choi.
Can go now, right?
Now, I'd like to ask John Kesbarian to discuss the highlights of Oualalou+Choi and why the firm has been awarded this year's Spotlight Prize. John.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure to introduce our winners today. I've already mentioned previously that one of the greatest pleasures that I have at the beginning of each year is our annual Spotlight Search Committee lunch, traditionally held on the first Friday in January. This year, two things were different. To our regular group of Lonnie Hogaboom, Rafael Longoria, Carlos Jimenez, Linda Sylvan, and the absolutely indispensable Mary Beth Warchaw, we added a new member, Niran Turan, assistant professor at the School of Architecture at Rice. We also changed the meeting venue from the defunct Julia's Restaurant to another female named one called Lucille, so a very able stand-in. But what I've enjoyed the most about these meetings is our discussion about the state of architecture in general, and in particular what the emerging generation is thinking about, what issues and aspirations are important to them, and their changing perspectives on the evolution of professional practice. Our debates are always thorough and convivial, and they have always yielded a consensus nominee, as was the case again this past January. This year's winners drew our attention on the strength of three recent projects that epitomize their original and refreshing approach to architecture, which in my view is the reflection of a unique reading of modernism, tempered by a keen sensibility towards an indigenous context. The first project is the remarkable installation at the Institut du Monde Arabe last fall, in conjunction with a major exhibit on contemporary architecture, on contemporary Morocco. Their design of a tent, or flege, I hope I pronounced that correctly, constructed out of more than 650 square meters of camel and goat wool, woven in the traditional way by artisans in the Saharan desert of Morocco, pays homage to the Moroccan nomadic traditions while simultaneously celebrating technical innovation. The second is the Pavilion for Morocco at the Venice Biennale that many of us were able to see last year, which has also meticulously executed interpretation of the sensorial experience of the Moroccan desert. And finally, the housing compound 18 kilometers outside of Marrakesh that they call Cohabitation, in which I had the great privilege of experiencing firsthand. The series of repetitive abstract concrete forms at once define the thresholds of the habitable domain with varying degrees of privacy and community, yet minimize the intrusion on the vast desert landscape, all in deference to the breathtaking views of the Atlas Mountains. Oualalou+Choi has already won numerous awards, including the 2012 Young Arab Architects Competition, WA Awards, and the EMAP Award for Emerging Architecture. They were finalists for the 2014 AFEX Award for an outstanding project undertaken by a French architect outside France. And this is just naming a few of the awards that they've got. Their work has been published extensively and exhibited internationally. Linna Choi received her Bachelor of Arts from Yale University and a Master of Architecture from Harvard's Graduate School of Design. She previously worked for Venturi Scott Brown in Philadelphia and Anderson Schwartz in New York. Tarik Oualalou received his degree in architecture, the Diploma DPLG, from the École d'Architecture Paris-Malaquais. He also holds a degree in art history from the École du Louvre and a degree in civil engineering from the Conservatoire National des Arts et Métiers in Paris. They both have served as visiting critics and taught studio at a number of institutions, but currently, and most importantly to us, they are teaching the studio at the Rice School of Architecture in Paris. Please join me in welcoming Tarik and Linna.
Thank you very much. We're extremely honored to receive this award. And it's a great pleasure to be with you and discover Houston and Texas. It's our very first time here. And it's been a few years now that we've been teaching the Rice Studio in Paris, but as you know, it's sort of a frontier outpost of Rice School of Architecture, so we're quite pleased to come and discover the mothership here. Tarik and I, we've been in practice almost 15 years now. We opened the office when we were very young and foolish, and ignorance is bliss. We didn't realize the challenges that lay ahead. But we've made a lot of mistakes along the way, but we've learned incredible things during this adventure. We've been partners in every sense in the past 15 years. We work together, we teach together, we have a couple of kids. But we don't always agree on the same thing. So we debated about the format of this lecture. And I very graciously agreed that he should present the work.
That's not what happened.
Or the other reading could be I cowardly backed away from it. But I like my version better. Anyway, he's a much better public speaker, so I will hand the reins over to him.
I'll call him. Okay, that's a hard act to follow. First, I have to apologize for sometimes my crude English speaking and language, and its lack of precision. And I like precision when I talk about the work, because I think it's quite important to be able to talk in a way where we convey our ideas in the most simple manner. So if I don't talk as well as I should, I apologize in advance. since this award is talking about what we've done in the past 15 years, we decided with Linna that we should ourselves look back at what we've done. We're a little bit of a crazy office. We work in many different places, different continents, on different projects, from cities to stadiums to houses to everything that we can lay our hand on, essentially. So we didn't take so much time to look at what we've done. And I thank you for this opportunity to have to do that. And I start with a basic conversation, and something that's very dear to both Linna and I right now. The practice of architecture, what we do, is, I believe, one of the greatest callings that one can have. And this calling is even more important right now in a moment of virtual everything. Architecture weighs us down. It has gravity. It manages the relationship we have with ourselves, the relationship we have with one another, the relationship together we have with the communal and political powers, and the relation that all of that has to be universal and mystical. And in that sense, it's fundamental. It's maybe obsolete in many ways. It's a form of resistance to this tweeting form of existence that we all have. But it's a form of resistance that we cherish very much. And in this sense, we believe that architecture has both a very material and immaterial dimension. That is both very much a witness of its time and has to have a timelessness to it. That it both belongs where it is and has to belong to all the other places. And this balance between all of these things is what is so important to us, and the reason why we do this. So we do it with lightness of heart and as much whimsical energy as possible, but it is a very serious thing to do. And I know architects right now are not doing the best job to protect this dimension. And the reason why we're failing generally as a profession is that the architecture used to be public service. Now it's a service industry. And in becoming a service industry, architecture has become irrelevant in many ways. It simplifies reality into marketable, understandable, and ultimately sellable concepts and products. We don't talk about projects anymore. People talk about products. That's a little bit unnerving to us. And this sliding, this disappearance of our public prerogative is something that we very much fight against. And we try to build our practice on the fact that architecture has to serve our contractual relationship to our client and also serve the relationship we have to the community and to the public space. And in this very sad state of affairs that is not just something we see here in America or in Europe, we see it pretty much everywhere, the disappearance of the relevancy of architecture. There's a great tendency to hide under a jargon, post-critical language that nobody can understand, but the very few that are hiding under protected dimensions. And that's everything we don't think architecture is about. Architecture has to happen with everybody. We have to want more, we have to do more, we have to propose more, we have to create more things that involve people into this discourse. So what I'm going to try to do today very quickly, and Linna, please keep me on time, is offer you, propose to you, a few strategies for making architecture relevant again. First thing, there are two things that Linna and I keep in mind whenever we start a project. The first one is that architecture is never a solution to a problem. This form of solutionism that contemporary architecture has fallen into, where we actually build the rationale for problems that don't exist, is deeply rooted in the modern movement, which we cherish. I show this picture. It's a building called Nida Beehive. It was built in 1953 in Morocco. At the time, it was one of the fer de lance of the Team 10, the reinvention of the modern movement. It was a fantastic idea. The notion was, Contilis et Cochard, the architects who designed this, they looked at the local architecture and they looked at the patio houses, and they decided that we have to find a way to civilize all of these people. So we're going to build patio houses, but suspended, which are these things you see here, right? And the expression of it is actually extraordinary, very abstract. No tectonic, no doors, no windows. And a few years back, we did an exhibition on Casablanca, and we wrote a book with Jean-Luc Pen on it. And I was in charge of looking at the building as they are today and having to photograph it. I had the address, the exact address, and I couldn't find it. I knew it wasn't demolished. It was like this. And all they wanted is not a courtyard. They wanted one more room. Everybody wants one room. And for me, that's the definition of what we do, what we shouldn't do. We have to be careful to not characterize our approach into understandable solutions that simplify the form of reality we're in. So that's the first pitfall we try to not go into. The second one, and I love this image. Gary has a fantastic expression that I heard on an interview he gave some 30 years ago. He said, well, architects are very proud to be doing their budget on time, doing the right program, doing it on budget, doing decent looking building, so what? And I couldn't agree more. I think we have to be able to talk about something else. Doing it on time, on budget, and respecting the program, that's just a job. We all have to do that, and there's nothing remarkable about it. And I don't need to show you 75 diagrams about how I'm subverting a program to do it. That's just what we do. So what else? And this what else is what I'm interested in. We have to reach for the stars. I don't know, it sounds cheesy, but we have to be much more ambitious with what we do than what we're asked to be done. Otherwise, we're just, we're back prior to the Renaissance times. We go back to being builders. And there was 500 years of history that allowed us to be able to come here and talk about these things. So I'm going to propose 5 approaches, which are very caricatural. And I'm going to talk about a few projects, some very quickly. I don't want to get into the detail of them. The first approach is the relationship that we have with the territory. And by territory, I mean, in French we say le grand paysage, the great landscape. And that's something that I've actually discovered where here in America, most of the American landscape is always the tension between the built environment and the taming of nature, the necessary taming of nature. And the way we respond to this has to do with how we can make elements in the landscape mean something. That's a wall that you would see in the southern part of Morocco. There are just structures like this all over the mountains and near the city of Marrakech and where that's at. And you never know what they're for. This is actually one of the most decorated ones. They're used one time of the year. The rest of the time, they're just reminiscence in the landscape. And one time of the year, after a big religious holiday where we eat a lot, everybody goes to pray. And that's it. It's one prayer, one time, it lasts for maybe 20 minutes, and then it's gone. The relationship of architecture to the landscape, of the fact that a dimension of the architecture, a spatial dimension of architecture can disappear, is something that fascinated us. The first project I'm going to show is a museum we built in the Roman city of Volubilis. Volubilis is one of these incredible Roman remains, and it has something amazing that hasn't been touched. Nothing around it has changed for the past 2,000 years. The landscape of it is the same as the Romans left it. Wheat, cypresses, grapevines. And we were hired to build the first museum in Moroccan history after independence, which sounds grand, but actually at the time was very small. That's the town as it was. The interior of the, as you see, they all concentrated the building here. There's a small area here where nothing happened. The reason for that is that the Roman, being smarter than us, realized the terrain was very bad. So right here in the early 20s, the French built a few structures which had some beautiful qualities. They were quaint, they were very elegant, but they were in ruin because they were built on unstable ground. And you can see here, for people who are interested in this sort of thing, sorry, we're having some trouble with the, yeah. It looks like there's been an earthquake, right? So we were asked to build a museum. UNESCO told us you can't do anything. You can't touch this building, you can rehab them, but that's that. A year and a half of conversation with the UNESCO because this site is protected in the World Heritage Program. And we were nowhere. We had designed a very nice building that we were proud of. This was very early on in our career. And all they wanted to do was do this rehabilitation. So one day, I go see the Minister of Culture, who was born about 5 kilometers away from this. And I said, okay, we have a meeting with them on Tuesday. This is Friday. Let's bring some bulldozer, take everything down and see. That's exactly what we did. We took it down in a weekend. They were completely insane when they saw it. But then we made the building and they're very happy with it. I'm saying this because, okay, they didn't have much choice, but that being said, let me see if this works. Okay, so the building is not a building. The building is a structure that's 6 meters wide by 250 meters long. What we wanted to do when the building went down is to give back the perception of the landscape. So the highest part of the building is lower than the lower part of the site. And we decided that the relationship to the ruins shouldn't be one of mimicking, but we wanted to build inside the project its own disappearance. So we're building with concrete, Roman. We're building with stone from the quarries that are a mile away, and we're building with wood, and that's that. So the wood goes away, and then the stone goes away, and then the concrete goes away in this time. So the building is just a series of traces. On one side you have the public area, on the other side you have all the housing and the research center and so on and so forth. But in the end it's a promenade more than an actual building. We built this with no money and a lot of time. The construction site took almost 8 years. And we built it in a very in a crafty kind of way. It's almost cooking in a way. I'll show you a couple of examples. So the building presents itself like this, but you never see it like that. It's going too fast. Okay, so that's the view of the entrance, where we carve down the site to the left of the private areas and to the right the public spaces. The interesting part of this is that the fact that we had absolutely no budget to do anything allowed us to do some really interesting processes. We wanted to build this in concrete, but this kind of old-fashioned 50s concrete with acne and thickness that catches the light. And we could decide to either have wood or concrete. So what we did is we took these, the wood that you see on the facade, which is very expensive cedar wood, and we used it to build the formworks. And, well, it's going too fast, sorry. Once the formwork was poured and finished, we took out the wood, we polished it, we let it dry for a year, and then we put it back on the facade, which is the only reason why we managed to get a level of detail that sounds like could be done by Zumthor, but it's not. But it's just because it's the same thing. It's a very simple building that sees about 500,000 people seeing it every year. And ever since it opened, it's taken a very quickly part of the landscape. This is painful, sorry. So that's the wood we use to do that. This relationship to the line, and by line I mean a building that becomes so thin that it loses its third dimension. So it becomes something that is defined by its relationship to the landscape more than what happened within. It's something that's been going over and over in our work. This is a sports center we're building right now that's under construction, where we had a very big site for a very little program. So what we decided to do is put, well, there's some covered, swimming pools and basketball courts and so on, but all this program is actually very, very small. So we put it against this crust of a building, which we pushed inside the site to give away a public space to the city, which doesn't exist, and create this 350 meter long structure. Again, dealing with this notion of what's within and what's outside. John very nicely talked about this series of houses we built in the countryside in Marrakesh. Again, the same relationship of living in this short dimension. This is an interesting project because it's outside of any urban context. So you deal with old-fashioned things like wind and sun and looking for where the water goes. And it sounds silly, but it was actually a fantastic lesson. There's our two houses next to each other. Both of them wanted the view to the beautiful mountains without being seen from each other. So what we decided to do is these two homes are on the same line. There's a series of interlocked volume, which are built very rustically, as John has experienced. going too fast, sorry. So this is one of them. This notion of line also has to do with the perception of it. And this is a small hotel we did on the racing track of Le 24 Heures du Mans, where they race for 24 hours at 300 kilometers an hour. And we're building this tiny economical hotel, one-star hotel there, and we needed to find an expression for it so it could be seen very, very quickly. Sorry, it's just going too fast, this thing. All right. This is a project that's been under permit for the better part of the last 5 years. It's in the middle of the Amazon in Cayenne. That's French Guyana. And it's a beautiful program of a hotel and residences and offices and so on in the park that literally is a chunk of the Amazon forest. So what we decided to do is to give back the access to the park to the public because it was closed. So we didn't build the building on top, but we built it as a rim right below the calotte, the highest point. So that when you're inside any of these hotel rooms, you're literally at the height of the fruit, or as Linna likes to call it, the snake. They actually have snakes that jump from branches to branches, pretty scary. But it's a nice building, which is all built in bamboo and that sort of thing, but I'm hoping to see that built one day. So that's our relationship to the territory and the working with the landscape and erasing dimensions in architecture to emphasize that relationship. The second conversation, which I've had with some of you today, is this relationship to familiarity, which is very dear to me, and it has to do with how, as an architect, we are part of a conversation. We don't have to be part of a place. We just have to want to be part of a conversation, so that what we do is relevant in that context. Contemporary architecture has created so many of these buildings that are just patterns slapped on top of a facade that could be done in Dubai or Astana or Paris or New York, and it's just a matter of beauty contest of a skin. We actually believe that in order to make a meaningful project, we have to engage, and the way we engage is to try to create this sense of familiarity with the context. Familiarity for us is two things. One is, it's working with the notion that you have to leave space for people in your project. And I'm going to show this quick project that John has already described better than I would, actually. We were asked to do, in 2.5 months, an installation on the parvis of l'Institut du Monde Arabe, where previously the greatest, most famous, most honored Arab architect had built this giant turd of a building. And she actually had 2 years, we had 2 months. I love the Arab Institute, not just because Nouvelle was my boss, but because as a building, it was amazingly new. Everything that came of it is just tragic. So I almost have to say I don't like it, even though I really do, but it created this simplification of the reality so that the Arab world is essentially just a pattern, a moucharabieh you can put on a facade, and that's that. That's the Arab touch. And it's true in China, it's true in Japan, it's true in every place. It allows architects to work quickly. So I was very excited to be able to put something in front of it. We were asked to put it then, that was not our choice. And the interesting part, and that's a side political conversation, this is the Institut du Monde Arabe, not l'Institut du Monde Marocain, right? So there's all of the Arab world, where obviously nobody gets along. There's a small part of Morocco, which is the desert, the Sahara, which is a bit in dispute with the neighbors. We consider it's integral part of the territory, like, Texas would be part of the United States. Algeria and Mauritania, they don't always agree. So this, the Sahara, the desert, is what we decided to use as a base to express the presence of Morocco there. It could only happen because everybody was on holiday. It happened in July and August, so everybody from the Art Institute was away, and they came back to see it finished. We literally had 2 months, design, build. So what we proposed is to work with this notion of the tent, because they wanted a catering center, essentially. And the tent is absolutely universal. You have tents everywhere. I'll show you, this is Mongolia. In the Americas, you have teepees. Everybody has tents. The tent is the most primordial form of one of the most primordial form of architecture. The tabernacle was a tent for the people who versed in the Bible. So it is one of the first form of human shelter. So what we wanted to do is something where everybody would project themselves in it. We didn't want something that was Moroccan. That made no sense to us. We wanted to tap into this universal familiarity. So we built this very strange asymmetrical structure out of just 8 metal posts, if this thing wants to work. It's 8 metal posts, a fabric membrane, and then we taped this wool made out of camel hair on top of it. But we didn't tape it in the way that they do it in desert intention. We actually sided it, so it looks, as you'll see, as almost like a carapace. You say carapace in English? Skeleton, a shell of a prehistorical animal. It's a small building. It's 500 square meters. By the way, as a parenthesis, I'm very excited that we were recognized for the 3 projects John talked about. And I'm realizing that the smaller the projects are, the more people talk about them. So I'm deciding to not do any big projects anymore. But seriously, this notion of installation and small project have one quality, is that they go up fast. They go up quickly. For architects in the audience, you know that any given project takes 5 years between the time you think about it and the time it's finished. This takes 2 months. The beauty part of it is also the way we built it. So we had to order this wool in the south of Morocco, and we had 50 women in the desert weaving it, and then they had to work with the compagnons, artisans in Brittany, not talking the same language, and so forth, to put it together. And it was an interesting experience, to say the least. Sorry, I don't know. Okay, we could stop it. Okay. Just a few pictures of how it was put together. I love working with tensile fabric because it's one of these things that before it's tensed, it just looks wrong. It looks like there's too much skin, that somebody just lost too much weight quickly. And at some point when you start making it in tension, all of a sudden it takes a certain elegance to it. Sorry. This is painful, sorry guys. Okay, I was talking about, I don't know with whom today, Jean Nouvel came to the opening of it, and he usually travels with a court, right? Like Moses. And in this particular case, because there was, the Princess of Morocco, the President of the Republic of France, nobody cared about Jean Nouvel, and he was lost, completely lost. Oh. So he sees me, and he's like, yes. So he stuck to me for 5 minutes, and he's like, he goes in exactly where this picture takes. He's like, I actually like my facade. Anyway, that sums it up. But it was a great compliment because we redrew his facade essentially, a new profile. But that's also something we like. Architects make skies. Architects make topographies, and you can do it also at very small dimension. And it's also held the conversation of these 2 buildings, which are 2 great landmarks of Paris. Jussieu on one hand, which is an incredible university, and l'Institut du Monde Arabe on the other. And our little buffer was really creating a relationship that before that never existed. This is actually not a montage, it's a reality. So when you look at it from the short side, it shows that all of a sudden you're in the middle of the forest, in the middle of the Pousse. And the building becomes very small and shrunken. With this notion of familiarity comes this notion of evocation. Evocation is, we talked about it this afternoon, is how architecture triggers memories, sense, sensual relationships. And we think that it's a brilliant way of approaching this form of representation of identity. And we were asked to build the Moroccan pavilion for the Expo Universelle in Milan, which is still happening, and it was a fascinating exercise. It's something that I've been fighting away all my life, not wanting to be the flagship or representing Morocco, and all of a sudden we're asked to do this. Morocco has participated in every single Expo Universelle since 1868, and always with the same building. Always. Arcades, tiles, literally always same building. Sometimes very graceful, like this one. This is in Brussels. This is my favorite, New York City. Canada, always the same. This is the last one in Shanghai. And this form of identity is completely phantasmagoric. It's never existed, right? It's the fact that Morocco is such an incredibly diverse culture, incredibly inventive in the contemporary realm. When it presents itself to the world, always shows the frozen moments in time. There's a lot of reason for this, and this is not the place to talk about it, but it has to do with the permanence also of the power. Morocco is a monarchy, and monarchy doesn't really like elections that much. So this notion of cycles doesn't work with monarchy. Monarchy is about stability, and they've been there for almost 1,000 years, and they used architecture as this form of expression. So needless to say, it was a tough sell when we had to show them what we did. So for Milan, okay. The expo was built, sorry, I have to go back, in Milano on a Cardo decumanus. Those are the two axes that make the colonial towns, Roman towns, right? The Cardo comes from cardinal, is north-south, and the decumano is east-west. And the site we were given is right here. It just so happened that we enter from the north. So what we proposed, it was a week-long competition, I kid you not. What we proposed is to make the building the country. You would enter from the north, from the Gibraltar Strait, go through the oceanic regions and through the mountains and through the plains and through the desert and come out. So it's kind of a Disneyland experience inside. But in order to do this, we decided to build the building in Adobe, in form of a prefab Adobe, which is very simple. There is a metal and wood structure. And everything else is based on a single module of 2 meter by 2 meter by 60 centimeter wide Adobe structure that is within a wooden frame. Just as a parenthesis, we haven't taken down the building yet. It's coming down at the end of October. But building in Italy for Morocco in earth in 6 months has aged me 20 years. It's been the most challenging project we've had. So we did very simple, again, not because we didn't have money. Actually, we had a lot of money. We just didn't want to spend it. It's just not done. It's a building that's going to stay 6 months. It makes no sense to splurge. And all of these buildings, this was actually an exhibition centered on sustainability and feeding the planet. It was the most obscene architectural orgy that I had seen in a long time. And this building is the opposite of that. It's trying to not talk too much, not make too much noise, but it's trying to give you the experience of the country rather than the image of the country. The building has no windows or doors. It's not air conditioned. The building itself manages the air. The cracks that you see here vary in dimension as you go. They control the lights, they control the air. When you go inside, there's a topography of ceiling that gives you the sense of transformation, and that's it. It's going too fast, sorry guys. So these are construction pictures. Italian contractors make me feel that Moroccan contractors are great. And that's saying something, no? It was just truly horrible. Truly horrible. Anyway, but the building did what we wanted and more. Sorry. What it is that it's a landscape, it's a topography, it's one thing made out of many things. These many things are essentially two buildings touching each other. Each of these buildings is made out of a series of volumes, and the whole thing reads like one building, a village, or a module. And this transformation of scales is something that we like to play with. Very simple. Again, part of the smaller things we did that people talk a lot about. That's some of the spaces inside. So this notion of familiarity has to do with using architecture to enter in a cultural dialogue with the people that to control it is also quite important. So after the built, the unbuilt, the unbuildable, which are the protected green